Your AI tools need to call custom Python functions, but OpenAI's responses API only works with authenticated MCP servers. Here's how to make that connection securely. We'll follow the exact pattern from FastMCP's official docs. First, running the example without authentication to trigger the expected HTTP error. Then fixing it by adding the required bearer token in the tool's headers parameter. You'll see how version 2.6.0 enforces JWT verification using FastMCP's built-in RSAKeyPair utility for development, with explicit warnings about exposing unauthenticated servers, even temporarily with tools like ngrok. The key detail: authentication is configured per tool, not client-wide, matching OpenAI's requirement that each MCP server endpoint must validate requests independently.
From OpenAI, import OpenAI. Hash your server URL. Replace with your actual URL. URL equals https:// your server URL.com. Client equals OpenAI. Resp equals client responses create. Model equals GPT-4.1. Tools equals type MCP. Server label dice server. Server URL FURL/MCP/. Require approval never. Input equals roll a few dice. Print resp output text.
This demonstrates OpenAI's remote tool integration pattern using FastMCP servers as external function providers. The pattern creates a clean separation between AI orchestration and specialized tool execution, where the responses API dynamically discovers and invokes tools exposed by FastMCP servers. Unlike traditional API integrations, this approach requires explicit server configuration, including public URL accessibility and per-tool authentication headers, with the server URL parameter defining both the connection endpoint and security context. The implementation follows a two-phase workflow, where the AI first queries the server's ListTools endpoint to discover available functions, then constructs and dispatches authenticated requests when processing relevant natural language inputs. Authentication uses the bearer scheme in the authorization header, configured per tool via the headers parameter, with FastMCP 2.6.0 introducing mandatory token validation. Without proper headers, the server rejects requests with an HTTP error code, as shown in the official documentation's error example that demonstrates the first you'll see an error pattern before presenting the corrected version. This pattern solves the challenge of securely extending AI capabilities with custom logic, while maintaining strict control over exposed functionality. It's particularly valuable for adding domain-specific operations like the dice rolling example, database interactions, or proprietary API calls without modifying the core model. The trade-off requires public server deployment using tools like ngrok for development, with the official documentation explicitly warning against exposing unauthenticated servers. The Responses API uniquely supports this pattern among OpenAI's offerings, currently exposing only tools while intentionally excluding other MCP features like resources or prompts for security and simplicity. Let's break it down.
From OpenAI, import OpenAI.
This imports the OpenAI Python client for the Responses API. Following the official, first you'll see an error tutorial pattern. The example intentionally omits the required headers parameter with bearer token authentication, which version 2.6.0 enforces for all remote tool integrations. When run as shown, this will return code HTTP error, since the server URL endpoint requires an authorization header with RSAKeyPair-generated tokens. The official docs explicitly warn against exposing unauthenticated servers and recommend using ngrok with token auth during development.
Hash your server URL. Replace with your actual URL. URL equals https://yourserverurl.com.
This placeholder defines your FastMCP server's base URL for OpenAI's remote tool integration. The example intentionally omits authentication headers to demonstrate the standard. First, you'll see an error pattern from the official docs. For production use, replace this with your actual HTTPS endpoint and configure per tool authentication headers using the headers parameter. OpenAI's Responses API requires public internet accessibility, and FastMCP 260 enforces bearer token validation with RSAKeyPair-recommended tokens. Unauthenticated requests return code HTTP error, as shown in the official documentation. During development, use ngrok to expose your local server while ensuring proper authorization headers are set.
Client equals OpenAI.
Initializes the OpenAI client for remote tool execution using FastMCP's server-based pattern. This follows the official. First, you'll see an error tutorial structure where authentication is intentionally omitted to demonstrate the error case. The example will fail with code HTTP error because FastMCP 260 enforces per tool authentication via the server headers parameter, specifically requiring a bearer token in the authorization header. For development, the official docs recommend using RSAKeyPair for token generation and warn against exposing unauthenticated servers, suggesting ngrok with basic auth as the minimum viable security layer.
RESP equals client responses create. Model equals GPT-4.1.
This initializes an OpenAI Responses API call using FastMCP's remote tool sources pattern, intentionally showing the failing version first as per official documentation. The model parameter selects the AI model, while tools configures external functions. But this example lacks required authentication headers that became mandatory in FastMCP 260. The server URL parameter defines both transport and security context, but without the headers equals authorization. Bearer YOUR API key, parameter in the tool configuration, all requests return code HTTP error as shown in the official docs. For development, use ngrok with RSAKeyPair token generation and never expose unauthenticated servers to the internet.
Print RESP output text.
This prints the AI's response after executing the remote dice tool, demonstrating OpenAI's tool calling pattern with FastMCP servers. The example intentionally omits authentication headers, which became mandatory in FastMCP 260, so it will fail with code HTTP error until you configure the required authorization. Bearer header in the tool definition. For development, use ngrok to expose your local server and RSAKeyPair to generate test tokens, as the official docs warn against running unauthenticated servers on public networks. The tool configuration explicitly controls which endpoints are exposed, keeping other resources private while enabling only the specified remote operations. FastMCP tool discovery pattern. The Responses API connects OpenAI models to FastMCP servers by querying the list tools endpoint, with each tool's accessibility determined by its server URL and authentication headers. This example intentionally omits the required authorization. Bearer header to demonstrate FastMCP 260's security model, which returns code HTTP error for unauthenticated requests exactly as shown in the official documentation. The headers parameter in each tool's configuration, rather than client-wide settings, controls authentication, with the official docs recommending RSAKeyPair for development token generation.
The tool that answers. Every call first learns to refuse them all.